time. Into the woods, it's time to go. I hate to leave, I have to though. Into the woods, it's time, and so I must begin my journey. Into the woods and through the trees to where I am expected, ma'am. Into the woods to grandmother's house. Into the woods to grandmother's house. Into the woods and down the dell, the path is straight, I know it well. Into the woods, and who can tell what's waiting on the journey? Into the woods, along the stream, around beyond the lily pond. Into the woods to grandmother's house. Into the woods to grandmother's house. The way is clear, the light is good. I have no fear, nor no one should. The woods are just trees, the trees are just wood. I sort of hate to ask it, but do you have a basket? Into the woods, who knows what lies beyond the moss and butterflies? Into the woods, what nice surprise awaits me on my journey? Into the woods to bring some bread to Granny, who was sick in bed. Never can tell what lies ahead, for all that I know she's already dead. But into the woods, and out of the woods and home before dark.
Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Utica. My name is Melissa Barlett and I am a member of our worship committee. Whether you are visiting for the first time or have been a member for many years, you are welcome here. Whatever faiths you have known, if any, you are welcome here. Whoever you are and whomever you love, you are welcome here. We're invited to bring our whole selves to this worship service, our doubts as well as our convictions, the pain and joy we have known, our longing for connection and understanding. Every part of you is welcome here. If you are signing in today for the first time, we are glad you have joined us. We would love to learn a little bit more about you and connect you with our newsletter if you like. There is a link in the chat that you can, to a form that we hope any visitors would be willing to fill out, and we hope that you stay for informal conversation in breakout groups after the service. So we do have a handful of announcements today. Our inclusion team is planning a virtual workshop for mid to late February as part of UU Utica's continued dedication to the Welcoming Congregations program. They'd like to know how many people might be interested in attending so that they can schedule it. Please click the link in the chat to answer the interest poll, and the link will go out in the next newsletter. You'll also notice that you can contact Jules for more information. We have one more part of our whole church retreat this Wednesday evening, 6:30 to 8:30, and you can absolutely still join us even if you didn't get to the last one. So the sign up information for that was in the most recent newsletter, and I believe you can sign up at that link. And please join us tomorrow night at 6 p.m. on Zoom if you want to learn more about police reform efforts in our area and specifically talk about civilian oversight options. So details are in the most recent newsletter. And let's see, and I think I have a Facebook link. Links today. All the links. That is it for announcements. So let us open our hearts and minds to the experience of community and the wisdom of love. I'm going to go ahead and light chalice this morning. Our chalice lighting this morning by Kate DeMillo, adapted from The Tale of Despereaux. Stories are light. Light is precious in a world so dark. Begin at the beginning. Tell a story. Make some light.
Our reading is Invitation by Shel Silverstein. If you are a dreamer, come in. If you are a dreamer, a wisher, a liar, a hoper, a prayer, a magic bean buyer, if you're a pretender, come sit by my fire, for we have some flax golden tales to spin. Come in, come in.
Good morning, and thank you, Melissa, for that lovely rendition of Sakura. Today, for our story, we're going to go to Japan and hear the story of Isun Boshi. So as they say in Japan, Mukashi Mukashi, in a little village far away from the capital city, there lived an old man and an old woman who unfortunately had never had a child until then. Until one day, miraculously, a son was born to them. Only he was very tiny, no bigger than one sun, like your thumb. And even as he got older, he didn't grow, always staying that size. But he was a good son to them as much as he could be, and helped around the house where he could. But like many children, he also grew up with his own dreams, and he wanted to go to the capital and become a samurai, learn how to fight and defend people. And however sad they were to see their son go, his parents accepted it and gave him all they could. So he set off down the river towards the capital with a rice bowl as his boat and a chopstick as his oar, and a little needle in his waistband for a sword. When he arrived in the capital, unfortunately, he had some difficulty finding a place to serve as a samurai, because not many people would take him very seriously, since he was only as tall as their thumb. But then one of the daimyo decided, all right, you come work for me. You'll be one of my daughter Haruhime's guards. And so, over a few years, Haruhime and Isun Boshi became such good friends. He learned to read, write, and learned all the fighting skills that he'd need to be a good samurai as well. He'd been there some time when Haruhime decided to go visit Kiyomizu-dera, one of the main temples in town. So Isun Boshi set off with some of her and her friends off to the temple, but on the way, they were stopped by some oni. And oni are demons who looked like this. Pretty scary. So an oni blocked their path and threatened them with his huge club. and saying, all right, who dares to fight me? And even the guards were scared, but Isumboshi stood out right in the front saying, I'll take you up on that. I'll be your opponent. Oregai teda. The Oni laughed, saying, you're nothing more than a little snack. Picked up Isumboshi, tossed him in the air, caught him in his mouth. And everyone, of course, screamed in horror, thinking that poor Isumboshi was gone. But before they had a chance to act any further, the Oni doubled over, clutching his stomach. Ow, ow, stop it, stop it. Isumboshi had started piercing the Oni's throat, tongue, wherever, with his little needle sword, until finally the Oni spat him back out, saying, all right, I give. I'll leave you all alone. And he ran away, leaving his club, and Isumboshi behind him saying, and stay gone. Don't come back anymore. With everyone safe now, Haruhime ran to see that Isumboshi really was all right, and then said, oh, look, the Oni left his club here. This is a magical item, and maybe it'll grant us a wish. So Haruhime, being the bigger and stronger of the two at that time, she lifted the Oni's club and said, well, what would you wish for, Isumboshi? And he said, well, I'd like to be a little taller. And so Haruhime used the club's magic to wish for Isumboshi to be taller. And there he was, a tall, handsome young man. And thanks for saving Haruhime and recognition of the fact that the two liked each other, Haruhime's father agreed that she and Isumboshi could marry. And then Isumboshi returned with his bride back to his parents in their little village, where they all lived forever after. The end. So that story is a touch different from what you tend to hear from, say, Grimm's or Perrault, but I wanted to start off with that as a way of talking about how stories are different in different cultures. Isumboshi always puts me a little bit in mind of Tom Thumb, if anybody's familiar with that. The Tom Thumb being the little boy who is still born, only as big as someone's thumb, and goes on adventures himself. Of course, the difference being that Tom Thumb's adventures happen over only maybe a few days to weeks at most, and Isumboshi's take years, where he trains to be a good warrior and a good man. And Tom Thumb never actually gets to be what we would say a normal height. He is the same size at the end of the story, where Isumboshi grows up to the height the height you would expect him to be, thanks to a wish and some magic. And thinking about, some of the differences between that story on a deeper level, and I think about other Japanese heroes like Momotaro, who you see on the cover here, the little boy who was born from a peach and also went on to defeat some Oni and save many people. Or Kintaro, a very strong young boy who is friends with many animals in his neighborhood and protects them from a bear and takes care of his mother. Japanese heroes go home at the end of their stories. Unlike what you see in many European fairy tales that you're familiar with, where it's often the youngest son who, because he has little inheritance, has to strike out on his own. Which shows the difference between two cultures when you think about it. Japan has always been a society where the son remained in his parents' home, and so as he married, the family grew there. But and that didn't matter if you were the first son, second son, third son. All of them stayed in their parents' house. they all shared the inheritance. But in Europe, where it was always the oldest son inheriting for quite some time, younger sons did have to shift for themselves. And so I think that that's where you see a lot of the stories of a younger son triumphing, maybe even coming out better than his older ones. Stories not only teach lessons, but they allow us to process things. So you get a lot of, say, a younger son. So in Europe, you have the younger son triumphing. Japan, the son goes out, makes a name for himself, and comes home having brought, as they say in Disney's Mulan, honor to them all. Because, of course, his good name reflected on his family's name, too. But that said, no matter which the culture, you do see someone going out to the world, making a name for themselves and growing up. In Issun-boshi in particular, I wonder if some of that too was for the parents, and the story serving as a reminder for parents that someday your children will have to leave you for a time, go out on their own and make their own way in the world. But it serves as a reminder for children to remember their parents and be grateful for them. Most heroes in any of these stories, even not Momotaro, Kintaro, or Issun-boshi, in many of these stories, gratitude plays a part as well, whether gratitude for the parents that raised you or someone who showed you kindness. Kachi Kachiyama, one of the stories in here, has a rabbit who basically takes revenge on a tanuki when the tanuki hurts an old woman that had been kind to the rabbit. That said, one story from an Asian culture which would sound very familiar to us, even resembling its European counterpart, more than Tom Thumb resembles Issun-boshi, is the story of Yexin. Yexin comes from China, and she is called the Chinese Cinderella or the original Cinderella, because her story dates back much further than what we have from Perrault or Grimm. And she was a young girl who lived in a cave, because this is very back in the day, with her stepmother and stepsister, was also treated very badly and received magical help to have a beautiful outfit to go to a dance in, and caught everybody's eye, and eventually married a prince. And even was identified by her shoe, which quite possibly is not as odd as you might think when you consider the Chinese tradition of foot binding and the fact that back in the day, people made their own shoes. So of course it was more likely that one pair of shoes would only fit one person. But what we see in all these stories is that no matter what the cultural setting that affected some of what was said, is they were always a way for people to put into some words or use some imagination and creativity to express a value that they hoped that the listeners would share or take in. And also that sometimes stories aren't so different from place to place. People have, no matter where you are people, and they all share similar concerns. And now that concludes my bit for this moment. And let's go to the offering.
All right. Our offering, we remind you that to continue to tell our story as a congregation, we rely on your gifts and your treasures. You can mail these to the church, have your bank mail them automatically, like I do, or use our PayPal button. The church address and the PayPal button are found at the link on our screen, which is also going to be in the chat. Please enjoy the offertory.
Mother said, straight ahead, not to delay or be misled. I should have heeded her advice, but he seemed so nice. And he showed me things, many beautiful things, that I hadn't thought to explore. They were off my path, so I never had dared. I had been so careful, I never had cared. And he made me feel excited, well, excited and scared. When he said, "Come in," with that sickening grin, how could I know what was in store? Once his teeth were bare, though I really got scared. Well, excited and scared, but he drew me close and he swallowed me down a dark, slimy path where lie secrets that I never want to know. And when everything familiar seemed to disappear forever, at the end of the path was Granny once again, and we wait in the dark until someone sets us free. And we're brought into the light, and we're back at the start. And I know things now, many valuable things that I hadn't known before. Do not put your faith in a cape and a hood. They will not protect you the way that they should. And take extra care with strangers, even flowers have their dangers. And though scary is exciting, nice is different than good. Now I know, don't be scared, Granny is right, just be prepared. Isn't it nice to know a lot? And a little bit not.
Our reading is Instructions by Neil Gaiman, illustrated by Charles Vess. Touch the wooden gate in the wall you never saw before. Say please before you open the latch. Go through. Walk down the path. A red metal imp hangs from the green painted front door as a knocker. Do not touch it. It will bite your fingers. Walk through the house. Take nothing. Eat nothing. However, if any creature tells you that it hungers, feed it. If it tells you that it is dirty, clean it. If it cries to you that it hurts, if you can, ease its pain. From the back garden, you will be able to see the wild wood. The deep well you walk past leads to winter's realm. There is another land at the bottom of it. If you turn around here, you can walk back safely. You will lose no face. I will not think less of you. Once through the garden, you will be in the wood. The trees are old. Eyes peer from the undergrowth. Beneath a twisted oak sits an old woman. She may ask for something. Give it to her. She will point the way to the castle. Inside it are 3 princesses. Do not trust the youngest. Walk on. In the clearing beyond the castle, the 12 months sit about a fire, warming their feet, exchanging tales. They may do favors for you, if you are polite. You may pick strawberries in December's frost. Trust the wolves, but do not tell them where you are going. The river can be crossed by the ferry. The ferryman will take you. The answer to his question is this. If he hands the oar to his passenger, he will be free to leave the boat. Only tell him this from a safe distance. If an eagle gives you a feather, keep it safe. Remember that giants sleep too soundly, that witches are often betrayed by their appetites. Dragons have one soft spot somewhere, always. Hearts can be well hidden, and you betray them with your tongue. Do not be jealous of your sister. Know that diamonds and roses are as uncomfortable when they tumble from one's lips as toads and frogs. Colder, too, and sharper, and they cut. Remember your name. Do not lose hope. What you seek will be found. Trust ghosts. Trust those that you have helped to help you in their turn. Trust dreams. Trust your heart, and trust your story. When you come back, return the way you came. Favors will be returned, debts will be repaid. Do not forget your manners. Do not look back. Ride the wise eagle. You shall not fall. Ride the silver fish. You will not drown. Ride the gray wolf. Hold tightly to his fur. There is a worm at the heart of the tower. That is why it will not stand. When you reach the little house, the place your journey started, you will recognize it, although it will seem much smaller than you remember. Walk up the path and through the garden gate you never saw before, but once. And then go home, or make a home, or rest.
Thank you, Stephanie. And now we've moved on to ground that's a bit more familiar to us in Europe with these guys, the Brothers Grimm. Or actually, not them quite yet, because even before the Brothers Grimm started writing down their tales, you had a major center of folklore recording beginning in France, or at least the beginnings of folklore as literature. You had writers like Charles Perrault, writing things down. Also, women were leaders here too in some ways. You had Madame d'Aulnoy, Madame de Villeneuve, and Madame de Beaumont, who were writing down fairy tales and folklore-like stories, mostly for wealthy audiences in their salons. And it's also important for me to note that these mostly were written for adults, though Madame de Beaumont is probably the most famous for abridging Beauty and the Beast for a children's magazine, her Magasin des Enfants, probably a good 50, 60 years, even before the Grimm brothers started their work, noting things down and starting what would turn out to be a shift to fairy tales as hopefully more child-friendly entertainment. But of course, what was deemed child-friendly then and what was needed for children back then is very different from what we consider to be family-friendly and child-friendly now. And then you had the Napoleonic Wars happened. You had a lot of French expats moving over into areas of Germany that were still unoccupied, and you had a movement in Germany to try to create a unified Germany, which was still many small countries at that point, small German countries. And part of that movement was, ta-da, these guys, the Grimm brothers. Jakob and Wilhelm began their work trying to help create a German identity through publishing these stories that they purported to be traditional German's tales, even though many of them were also stories that can be found in Perrault. Hence, you have Cendrillon and Aschenputtel, both Cinderella. Two versions of Little Red Riding Hood, one Perrault, one Grimm, and so on and so forth. Same for Sleeping Beauty. I think that Snow White is pretty unique to Grimm, though, and Rapunzel. While they tried to create the image that they'd gone to, these tiny village houses and talked to, all the old women hearing their stories. That wasn't always the case. Many of the stories were stories that they heard from their friends of a likewise middle-class background. And with each edition that they published, the stories shifted a little bit. As I said, these stories started out being written and geared towards adults. There was many a bawdy joke in them that got a titter among the grown-ups that was later taken out. But of course, because we can't have children thinking that it's okay to do good things, the fates of the evildoers became even grimmer. This is why in the Perrault version of Cinderella, you have her eventually forgiving her stepmother and stepsisters. But in the Grimm version, well, if you've seen Into the Woods and know what happens to the stepsisters there, that's taken from the Grimm book. That's taken from the Grimm version of the tale. Suffice to say, the stepsisters end up blind in a very uncomfortable way. And writing on the coattails of the Grimm brothers, you have Hans Christian Andersen, whose stories are not based on folklore, nor do I think that he ever tried to claim that they were. But he was working in that tradition of a fairy tale-like story, and most of them geared at children, again, with very nasty fates for children who don't behave well. These stories are also very much products of their time. Among the lesser known Grimm stories are some that are very anti-Semitic, or because of ideas about Jewish people at the time. Those aren't the ones that tend to get made into Disney movies these days. Not much market for them. And again, as I was talking about when I mentioned the Japanese stories, because these were meant for children and to hopefully teach them good morals, there were lessons like, have faith, be good and kind, even when people are not kind to you. Help your neighbors, because it will be returned to you. As is mentioned in instructions, favors will be returned. There's many a Grimm's hero who helps usually animals smaller than him along the way, who ends up being helped by them later. So that is sort of some of the advent of the quote unquote family friendly version. The fates of the villains are still not anything that we would probably find acceptable today, but it shows, at least in Europe, a beginning of an actual conscious movement to say, okay, we're going to have these stories written for children with hopes that they will learn something from them. And now let's go on to tell some of our own stories in Community Candles.
So in a moment, we will practice our community candles, which is an opportunity for all of us to tell our stories and share our joys and sorrows. While you listen to the music, you can share your joy or sorrow in the chat, or once the music is over, I will invite you to share your stories out loud.
All right. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you everyone for sharing your stories. This third reading this morning comes to us from Roald Dahl and his poem Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf, a more modern telling of the story in which Red Riding Hood proves perfectly capable of taking care of the wolf herself. No comfort needed. No help needed. And this is a little bit towards the end. A few weeks later in the wood, I came across Miss Riding Hood. But what a change, no cloak of red, no silly hood upon her head. She said, hello, and do please note my lovely furry wolfskin coat. So as Mr. Dahl's poem there reflects that times have changed since the Brothers Grimm were noting down their tales, but we're still telling them. We're just putting our spin on them. And probably no company more known for putting out those stories than Disney, the House of Mouse. And basically sometimes their versions of the stories have become the ones that most people know these days. In fact, their versions of the fairy tales. But even then, the company itself has been making these movies since the 30s, and how they tell the stories has changed using this new medium. So for instance, you got Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. Unfortunately, I don't have Snow White to show off here. But all of these movies follow their fairy tale stories reasonably closely. The one, a big change is especially giving the prince in Snow White a slightly bigger part, Prince Philip a much bigger part in Sleeping Beauty than either of the princes had in their tales, and condensing the ball in Cinderella into one night, when in both the Perrault and Grimm's versions, she had 3 nights of dancing to get to know the prince and be sure he was the guy she wanted. But again, they followed the stories fairly closely, mostly because at that time, the way that they were was fine, and Disney wanted to pay homage to those. And then we get to my generation, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and this is when things were starting to change. They very much adjusted the stories for what they wanted to tell in the 80s and 90s. Did the same with Mulan, China's hero. These heroines are much more active. Ariel is definitely determined to go after what she wants, and she even does her part in the last fight against Ursula. An interesting change that they made to Andersen's tale for that is the original Little Mermaid in Andersen was never forbidden to go to the surface. The idea being that, yes, she had to wait until she was a certain age to, but once she'd satisfied her curiosity about the surface world, she would be content to stay home under the sea. In Disney's version, she is a rather headstrong teenager with an attitude, but at that point, that was an unusual thing among these fairy tale heroines and was welcome. And then we have Beauty and the Beast. Belle was my gal as a kid. She was my Disney princess who I loved. We shared a love of books. And if someone gave me a library like the Beast gave her, I'd probably fall in love with them too, just gonna say. But they also changed it so that the Beast had some growing up to do himself. In the literary tale, he's already a pretty good guy aside from just looking beastly. In the Disney version, he has to sort of prove that he can grow up and be a good person. And in some ways that's to contrast the villain. Because yes, Disney gave us a whole new villain in Beauty and the Beast and Gaston. And here's where you even get something fairly unique to the 80s and 90s time period, because this was a movie very heavily influenced by Howard Ashman, a queer man who at that point was dying of complications from AIDS. who would have dealt with villains of Gaston's sort very much, quite a bit throughout his life. The kind of person who, because they're what society deems that they should be, gets away with quite a few horrid things, actually, and is never encouraged to become better than he is because of that. So, and you could almost say that Disney's Beauty and the Beast is a story of two misfits finding each other. And speaking of misfits, yes, Disney gives us another one in Mulan, who doesn't seem to fit the image of the young lady her culture wants us to be, but still loves her family and wants to save her father's life by disguising herself as a boy and going off to save China, and succeeds. Of course, Disney took liberties with this, as it sometimes does. From what I've heard in the Chinese version of the story, she doesn't tell anybody that she's really a girl until after everything. Whereas in the Disney film, it's a big plot point that she gets discovered and has to earn back everybody's trust, or get them to believe her again now that she's a girl to them instead of one of the guys. But this was also the height of girl power in the 90s. So you could see why they adjusted the story for that. And now we've got some of the more recent ones in the 2000s. I'm sure many of the parents in the group will have watched some of these movies more times than they really have cared to. Especially Frozen. And in these, they continue, Disney continues to have heroines that are strong heroines by our standards today, but they also give the heroes a bit more to do, which is something that has continued from Sleeping Beauty. Prince Eric and Little Mermaid definitely has his share of the story as well. And some of these, especially Tangled, the hero might get as much time, if not more, as the heroine. But they're still updated for modern times. I like the New Orleans setting of The Princess and the Frog. And Tangled gives us a very chilling villain in Mother Gothel, who I'm hoping that if someone saw that and realized that their mother was treating them in a similar way, that they would realize that that is emotional abuse and can get some help there. And in some ways, she's actually helped people who have been through that situation and recovered. I've seen at least one review written by someone who very much identified with Tangled after getting away from their family. And we have the blockbuster Frozen, which is good. And I actually really enjoyed the twist on the whole true love thing. Instead of having it be a true love's kiss from a romantic partner, it is a selfless act of sisterly love that breaks the spell of the frozen heart. And Anna and Elsa both make it through well. But this one went through a lot of changes. At first, they were following Anderson's story more closely, and Elsa was the villain. Then Idina Menzel gave Let It Go the spin that she did, and they decided that it would work better for someone who was good but conflicted. And that changed the story ever since. Frozen 2 definitely has more modern values in that it's about dealing with unpleasant parts of your culture's history. When Anna and Elsa both discover that what they had been told about something that their grandfather did was wrong, and that it had actually been a villainous act. And they now have to correct it, which is very timely considering some of the environment that we find ourselves in these days. And that's just Disney, and that's Disney aiming things towards families, and again, still thinking about what sort of stories we want to tell our children and how we want to express things to our children. In print, and yes, they're still doing literary fairy tales these days. There are some of mine that I've still got from my heyday of collecting them. And the YA, the young adult YA market is huge here. And I've seen some wonderful interpretations. I've actually got not only this version of the story of the Goose Girl, but on ebook I've got another novelization of it that takes a different spin on it, and I love them both. But you also see in YA people taking chances and almost kind of getting back to some of that less pleasant aspect of things, you know, the grittier, darker potential in some of the fairy tales as well. Recently, I've read a book called Cinderella is Dead, which is a YA story that is set after Cinderella's ball much later in a world that has idolized that story and idolized Cinderella so much that it's become that she has become the epitome of what they want all girls to be. And of course, our plucky young heroine does not want that. And from there, the story goes into a wonderful queer romance where she ends up with another nice young lady. And they go both help take down the patriarchy. Probably something you could only write in modern day. But again, we are still taking these stories and seeing what we can get from them and how they can help us express our stories and values today. And I hope that we keep on doing it. And that is, and in closing, I'd like to ask you to join us in singing hymn 326, still remaining on mute, please, as we close the service.
Extinguish our chalice, the words on your screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. And our benediction is by G.K. Chesterton. Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us dragons can be beaten. Blessed be.
Till as old as time, true as it can be, change. Small to say the least, both a little scared, neither one prepared, Beauty and the Beast. Ever just the same, ever a surprise, ever as before, ever just as sure as the sun will rise. Tale as old as time, tune as old as song, bitter, sweet, and strange, finding you can change, learning you were wrong. Certain as the sun, rising in the east, tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme, beauty and